presentation to thank Sirpazan Hyde not only for being here and sharing his presence with us, but it's actually him from whom I've got the idea to even approach this subject. Sirpazan came to me and kind of gave me a direction about there is this writer, Ghevont Alishan, Mezahirchag, and there is kind of this writing, but we don't really know what it says. So with his help, I was able to really get into the depth of that writing and really mine it for an authentic Armenian tradition. I would also like to thank and welcome Dr. Roberta Irvin, who is also one of my professors at St. Narcissus, for whom I'm forever indebted just for the base knowledge of Armenian theology and Armenian Christian thought. She really opened my mind these past 3 and 4 years that I've been lucky to spend at seminary. Lastly, I would like to thank and welcome my beautiful wife Julianne, who has been a great support to me throughout my years in seminary. And without her, I don't think I could do much of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And finally, thank you all for coming out in this cold weather. So, I would like to start with a question which is somewhat controversial, although in many of our circles and in many of our daily lives, it's almost addressed on a daily basis, if not in words, definitely in our heads, in our minds. And this question is, what does it mean to be Armenian, right? And asking this question is kind of almost cliche, right? We have so many talks about this topic and what it means to be in Armenia today and the diaspora. But I hope with this talk and with this study, we can kind of approach that question from a new and different perspective, especially within the perspective of the Armenian Christian tradition. Because for many people, to be Armenian could perhaps mean being in Armenia and being brought up in the modern Republic of Armenia. Me personally, I would be foolish to think that I can myself give a definite answer to this question of what it means to be Armenian. Actually, this question probably would pertain more to my direct boss, Dr. Chris Sheklian, who is a sociologist, so I would be highly out of place to try to answer that question. But for many of us, this question really bothers us, right? It kind of occupies our daily thoughts, both in and outside church life. And it is something that I think warrants a little bit of exploration before we get into Alishan and Chrysostom. For some people, like I said, it means being born in the homeland. For others, it means our genetic makeup, the haplogroups, the RNA, all these different convoluted terms. What haplogroup differentiates us from the Greeks, from the Assyrians, from the English? And that is what, for us, makes us Armenian. For others, it could mean to be a possessor of the Armenian language, whether we're brought up with it, whether we use it on a daily basis. And, like I said, to be a citizen of the modern-day Republic of Armenia. Now, all of these things are great, wonderful things which do make us Armenian and which do play a role in our daily life, how we live our life in our families, in our communities, and in our church. But if these are the things that make us Armenian, what are the things that make us Armenian Christian? Taking it one step further, what does it and what did it mean to be an Armenian saint? Because at the end of the day, Verchin Hashvov, Polorasal, we are all called to be saints, to be living in union with Christ, our God. What it means to be an Armenian saint, this is a complicated question. And much of the complications surrounding what it means to be an Armenian saint is actually due to the rise of the idea of the nation state in the 19th century. And whether we know it or not, this ideology, or zeitgeist, or whatever you want to call it, is kind of born within all of us, no matter where we're born, whether we're born in America, in the Middle East, in the Soviet Union. The idea of the nation state is within our very psyche. For starters, when we as 21st century Americans hear the word nation, ask, our understanding of what a nation is and what it means to belong to a nation is going to be wholly different, completely different, from that of someone who was living as an Armenian in the 5th century. Our idea of what it means to belong to a nation and our definition of nation is completely different than that of Moses Khorenatsi, than that of Yerishe, than that of Ghazar Parbetsi. It's completely different. But when we read these texts, when we read these medieval texts, sometimes we implement and we superimpose our own ideas on that text and on that writer. In fact, we may only be grasping at straws. We may only have a shot in the dark to understand what Ask meant to those people. Returning to the question of what comprises a Armenian saint, a particularly Armenian saint, we have to understand that our idea of it has been influenced by our existence of living in diaspora, while simultaneously having access to an independent Republic of Armenia. And at least in the 20th century, much of the churches, the Armenian churches' understanding of what makes a saint Armenian has been derived from a few modern books that were available on this topic. One of the primary books for Armenian saints and the topic of Armenian sainthood is Surp Yevdonk. This was written by Yerchanga Hishadag, Patriarch of Jerusalem, Torkom Kushagyan. And in this book, it's a maybe 200 to 300 page book. It includes saints from all churches and all nations. And at the end of the book, it lists them by nation. Lists saints from the churches of Antioch, Cilicia, Mesopotamia, Iraq, Alexandria, Ethiopia, Rome, and Greece. And there is really no regard, or there's no hierarchy to this saint is better than this one or is more important than that one. But this work still divides the saints by their ethnic and their national origin. The English adaptation of this book, which was written in the 1980s, wholly excludes those saints who are not in that Armenian list. And with all due respect to the person who wrote this book, Haid Haigazun Melkonyan, who is very much respected, I know by many of us here who probably knew him personally. Many of us loved and respected him personally. This distinction between Armenian saints singled out a giant leap in the church's understanding of what it means to be a saint. It makes a subconscious distinction between saints. There are saints on one side, but then there are these special saints which we hold to a higher standard on another. And this is not limited to us in the diaspora. There's two different branches, Yergu Juka, right? There's Untanur Surper and there's Hayaski Surper, right? And even in Armenia, there are two different branches. So this psychology, it subconsciously enters our consciousness, and it interrupts or kind of distorts the way in which we view Christian sainthood. And this is not to say that any of these books are to be put aside or to be disregarded. These books are very important, and they're very useful for many of us to connect with our Armenian spirituality. But they must be always put in their context and must always be read in reference to other works. And one of the most important, probably, passages from the New Testament, which we read at every single baptism in the Armenian Church, is the following, and it's from Galatians. It reads, Kanzi amenekin vorti kazdusoek, havadovki Jesus Christos, vork mi ankami Christos mgrdetsaruk, as Christos es ketsialek, chik khedir, voch hrei, ye voch hetanosi, voch zarai, ye voch azadi, voch arvi, ye voch iki. Zi amenekian tuk miek ik Christos Jesus. In Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And no more is the truth of this passage more apparent in the Armenian Church's embrace of Saint John Chrysostom. And he, whose life I will briefly overview in a few minutes, Saint John Chrysostom has been revered by pretty much all of our saints that we define as uniquely Armenian. Grigor Naregatsi, Ananias Anahanetsi, Nerses Shnorali, Grigor Datevatsi. The list goes on and on and on of Armenian saints who owe a lot of their theology and a lot of their understanding about Christianity to St. John Chrysostom and his writings and his life. This is just to name a few. And actually, even in the margins of some of these manuscripts, for example, Sarkis Kund, you'll see Voske Peran, right? Because that's the Armenian name for Chrysostom, Voske Peran, golden mouth. But it's interesting, why did St. John Chrysostom have such a pull on the Armenian people? Why did the Armenians, for centuries, identify with the life and work of St. John Chrysostom? Well, he was born in Antioch, which is currently it's located in southern Turkey on the Syrian-Turkish border. Today it's called Antakya. He was half Assyrian and half Greek, ethnically. His mother was Assyrian and his father was a Greek soldier, a high-ranking soldier in the Roman army. But his father, Secundus, died when Chrysostom was very young. And so all of the money that Secundus had accumulated, he left to Chrysostom's mother. So you could really imagine that as a widow, Chrysostom and his mother really lived a very austere life. There was not much to go around, but they were comfortable. They weren't begging on the street. But Chrysostom's mother knew that it was important for her son to get an education. So she sent him to the best school, the best rhetorician, Libanus. So taking Greek rhetoric from Libanus and studying all of the ancient subjects, grammar, science, physics, philosophy. At the end of his studies, Libanus said that Chrysostom would have been ours if the Christians hadn't stolen him. He was ordained a priest in Antioch in the 380s, and he preached many of his homilies here, his homilies on Matthew, John, and other books of the New Testament. I mean, we have pretty much most of the New Testament commentaries from St. John Chrysostom in full. He was a constant defender of the poor and gave scathing homilies against the luxuriousness, the opulence, the decadence of the day. He was a constant defender of the poor and the oppressed. And it's perhaps in part because of this, he was vigorously lambasted. He was taken to what was called the Synod of the Oak. It was a kangaroo court, I guess you could call it, where they falsely accused him of being a follower of Origen. Right? Origen was who was considered a heretic at the time. That's being debated today. but at the time he was absolutely considered a heretic. So he was falsely accused of following that heretic. But when he was accused of following this heretic and removed from his post, the city of Antioch erupted in civil unrest, so they had to put him back. So they put him back in his place, and actually his renown spread so far that Constantinople and the people in Constantinople requested that he be made archbishop of the city, that he be made patriarch. And in 397, he was elected patriarch of Constantinople against his will. He didn't want to be it. But being the humble saint that he was, he accepted it. And it was during his time in Constantinople that we can say he didn't make too many friends. That is probably an understatement. This is it's a 19th century picture. And in this picture, we see the Empress Evdokia. She's in the upper mezzanine. And she had told Chrysostom, kind of quiet it down, like, let's not talk too much about the arkunik. Let's not talk too much about the excesses of the kingdom, of the empire, and everything wrong that's going on in the upper class. Keep your homilies based on the kind of more theological, highfalutin stuff, and leave the finances and economics to us. But he wouldn't do this, he wouldn't bend. And when Evdokia, in her pride, she established a statue of herself outside of the patriarchate, outside of the cathedral in Constantinople, in Bolis. Imagine putting a huge statue of yourself outside of a church. Hamar Sagutuna. Unbelievable. St. John Chrysostom preached 6 homilies against the statues, the famous homilies against the statues, telling her to take it down. And when she heard this, she went into a rage. And she had him exiled from Constantinople, taking him through the interior of Turkey, right through Anatolia, or Aravmudian Hayastan, all the way up to modern Armenia and to the Black Sea. Basically walked him to death, a death march. And his last words are actually codified in our own liturgy. Parkez ded hamenaini ded parkez. Glory to you, God, in all things, glory to you. These were the last words on this saint's lips. Now, returning again to why Chrysostom is important to us as Armenians, we must understand that this last part, the fact that he passed through Armenia, and that this was referenced to not only in Armenian sources, but in non-Armenian sources, this was very important. It was a point of pride for the Armenians, right? Even today, anyone who has any kind of reference to the Armenians, however slight, oh yeah, did you know that so-and-so is Armenian? Or so-and-so's stepfather's cousin is Armenian. We take a piece of pride in that, right? So it was kind of like this thing, right? At the beginning. He had passed and died in Armenia. But one of our most influential theologians in recent history, who many of us are aware of, Ghevont Alishan, really took this and studied this, and he put together a 100-page study of why it is that St. John Chrysostom, throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, has spoken to the Armenian soul. A brief biography of Ghevont Alishan, who is pictured here, working at his senyag, at his office in St. Lazarus, Surkhazar in Venice. Ghevont Alishan was born Kerov Pe Alishan in Constantinople in 1820 to Armenian Catholic parents, Petros and Takuhi Alishan. His inclination toward both the spiritual and academic was recognized at an early age, and at the age of 12, he voluntarily asked his parents to allow him to become a seminarian. Actually, we kind of see this today sometimes with seminarians that go to Jerusalem. After a month-long journey, it took a month for him to get from Bolis to Venice, He finally arrived at his destinations with a group of his peers, but he soon found out, very soon after he got to the seminary at 12 years old, that both of his parents had died within a month of each other. So he was pretty much, at the time that he arrived at the Mukhitarist Catholic Armenian seminary, he was an orphan. His biographer remarks that Alishan never made grand overtures or lamentations about his parents' death in his personal diary, but he did mark their deaths and their date of their deaths with a little cross. It must certainly have had an effect on his inner life to have lost them at such a young age. He was streamlined as a priest, right? His aptitude and his love and his academic and his faith life really propelled him and really gave confidence in his superiors to make him a priest, and he was ordained at the age of 20 as a celibate priest. He was later made the Desuch, the dean of the Mukhitarist seminary, and he also had various and multiple writing pursuits. He first created and wrote poetry, but most of his work was based on geography, was based on Armenian geography, Armenian Pusabanutyun, anything that had to do with the Armenian homeland or Armenian history, he wrote about. Thousands upon thousands of pages. And he became the head and the editor of the widely famous historical journal Bazmaveb, right? And he had the pen name Nahapet, forefather. It was in this journal that Alishan's article, quote, January 27th, Messenger in the Armenian Wilderness, about which we will be talking a little bit later, first appeared in 5 installments in 1865. This is where the bulk of what we get about Alishan's thought about Chrysostom. In addition to the numerous scholarly, academic, and theological articles, he began to publish works on geography. He remained healthy into his old age, but on November 21st, 1901, he had a heart attack, had trouble breathing, and died. So the work that we're exploring a little bit in depth today will be the one that I just mentioned, and it's collected in a 2-volume, 1,000-page work entitled Hushiga Kairenyats Hayots. And in this work, Alishan, in 100 pages, characterizes Chrysostom's life and meaning to the Armenian people. The subject of the work itself is the activity of people from Armenian history within the Armenian homeland. Even the word itself, Hushiguk, memories, this gives the idea of Hishadag, right? So Hishadagaran, which means like a gravesite, right? Hishadagaran, the place. So Alishan in this work, he takes Sahag Bartev, he takes Haik Nahabed, he takes Yerishe, and all Aristakes, Krikor Lusavorich, and all of these high medzed, these great Armenians of history, and in detail, he provides evidences and kind of like guides to where you can find their reliquaries, their grave sites, their shrines. This was very important to Alishan, to know where the person died and where their actual physical body was held. So that's the first part of every introduction he has to these famous people, and then later he gives their life and their importance. And it's interesting to note that Alishan, although never being born and raised, he's being raised in Constantinople, he never saw the Armenian homeland proper. He never stepped foot in Western Armenia. This plays no small part in his dedication to understanding and memorializing the graves of his parents, right, the ones that came before him, the great figures of both Armenian secular and ecclesial history. He writes that, quote, "The place of one's birth and the grave of the forebears are the two special points of humans, upon one of which the compass must stop. The heart which desires to outline a border for its homeland, if it does not know of one already. Therefore, although those birthplaces and resting places seem to be the points and centers of the homeland, they imply the memorial of a much greater inheritance that has been ignored and forgotten. This inheritance is the knowledge of God and divine wisdom, which has passed on through these holy people's speech and writings, which took place in the Armenian homeland and which guides us to our permanent homeland in communion with the Holy Trinity and the saints. For Ghevont Alishan, there is no distinction, or I don't want to say no distinction, but the idea of communion with God, religiosity, faith in Christ, and these physical places are interlinked. They're inseparable. And why is St. John Chrysostom Armenian? Ghevont Alishan outlines three major reasons for which St. John Chrysostom can be considered Armenian. And the first of these reasons is that St. John Chrysostom is a Tarkmanich. He is a translator. Whoa. Perhaps what is most striking is that he insists that St. John Chrysostom had a part in translating our own Bible. Tarkmanutun Tarkmanutians, the Takuhi Tarkmanutians. He says that St. John Chrysostom had a role in translating from Greek into Armenian the New Testament and the Psalms. Whether this is historically accurate or whether this is a kind of an extravagant mythology or legend, it's not the point here. The point is that the Armenians considered St. John Chrysostom to have played a part in their Christianization, right? Because, just as I had said before, during the time that St. Mesrop and St. Sahag were translating the Bible, St. John Chrysostom was passing through that very same area, right? When was the Armenian alphabet created? 404, 405, 406, whatever the year is. Chrysostom died in 407. So, on his death march, in his exile, he was exiled in Armenia with the Armenian people. And what does a bishop do? Does a bishop who's exiled just twiddle his thumbs and not do ministry? Not someone like Chrysostom. He was involved in the ministry to the Armenian people, whom he had a love for, even though he probably couldn't at first speak their language. And it is not only to the Armenians that Chrysostom was an evangelist to, but Alishan writes that in that same area, there were different tribes, right, who have been lost to history. There were, quote, Armenized tribes from the time of our forefather Aram, a half-barbaric and heathen people, separate from the faithful Armenians and Greeks, but kind of similar to the two. Alishan notes that even most European historians of the 16th and 17th centuries thought that Chrysostom was the first translator of the Armenian New Testament and Psalms. This was the prevailing idea of even European historians. Although Alishan ascribes these historians' conclusions to the lack of knowledge concerning St. Mesrop, he nevertheless makes a case for the possibility that Chrysostom did indeed play a part in the translation. He says that his classical education and tutelage under the ethnic Armenian pedagogue Polyctus, quote, prepared Chrysostom to translate the New Testament into their language. Furthermore, there existed, quote, a memory of an older translation of the Psalms. And actually, we know this to be true. Before the, quote, official translation by St. Mesrop, there were earlier attempts at translating this Bible. As in many other traditions, the Armenians also inherited a great number of Chrysostom's commentaries that we had mentioned earlier on Matthew, on John, on the Pauline epistles, and these were in Armenian translation. And the Mukhitadis took great effort in republishing these Armenian commentaries. Alishan writes of the Armenian translation of Chrysostom's commentary on Isaiah, insisting that, quote, "Those who are fortunate enough to read this Armenian translation, or even translation into other languages, will be indebted yet again to Armenian literature." Chrysostom's Megna Panutyun, his commentary on Isaiah, was considered an important part of Armenian literature. Alishan also writes that, quote, "We can say that the strongest conjunction between the Armenian and Greek church and literatures was Chrysostom." And so Chrysostom formed an ecumenical link between the Byzantine and Armenian churches. And here's the most important part, I think, of this whole section, this whole idea of Chrysostom as translator. He says, quote, Alishan says, "Perhaps if Chrysostom had been Armenian, John would not have been able to be more Armenian than this. Perhaps not even with his native Greek way of thought would he be able to top the Armenian translation. And just perhaps in some places does the Armenian translator indeed excel the Greek text, and I dare say that the messenger of the church even is sometimes more elegant and eloquent, a Chrysostom, a Voskeperan, a golden mouth, in his Armenian form, than in any other language, even than in his native Greek tongue." Whoa! Alishan says that he is more eloquent a speaker in Armenian than in the original Greek. And finally, on this point, before we move ahead, Chrysostom was also like our other translators. We can't understand our Tarkmanichnera in a Zud, Paratsioren Tarkmanetsin. They only translated the scriptures literally and they stopped there. No, all of our translators translated the meaning of the Bible, the meaning of the Christian faith for us in a language understandable to us, not only in a human language, but also in a language of faith and a language of spiritual understanding. Alishan says that in this way, in this more higher understanding of what it means to be a translator, translating the faith, passing on the faith, Chrysostom was, quote, "He will always remain unmatched in speech, which is more understandable to the people in practical and moral speech rather than the theoretical and allegorical, as many of the other fathers." Chrysostom was a true father. Although he had the ability, he had the unagutun, the hamatutun, to talk in theoretical and high theological terms, he really made the Christian faith available to the general public. The second reason why Alishan considers Chrysostom truly Armenian is that because he walked on Armenian land. So first, he's a translator. That's what makes him Armenian. Second, he walks on Armenian land. Continuing with this motif, most of us, I don't want to say all, but many of us, I'll say myself included, have lost this idea of attachment to a particular place. We may have childhood memories of where we grew up, but most of us, Steepvads, have to usually at some point move to another place in the country or across the world to find work, to support ourselves. We have to leave our families. I mean, this is just the American way of life. We have lost this ancient understanding, and this Christian understanding of attachment to place, the holiness of the place in which people lived and died. And this is why this takes on such a huge meaning in Alishan's work. As an Armenian from Constantinople, he would have had a vastly different experience of being Armenian than would have his counterparts living in Arevmedian Hayastan, in the more rural areas. Compounding this longing for the homeland is his separation from his own home in Constantinople as he was living in Venice. He puts a great deal of importance of Chrysostom walking within the boundaries of Armenian Hayastan, of the Western Armenia. He is captivated when St. John Chrysostom, in one of his letters, St. John Chrysostom writes, he compares Armenia to Antioch, the native climate of his homeland. And he further says something very important. First, I'll say it in Armenian. Alishan writes, Ov an choch meshag Christosi aikvuin, zor hergeir, yev tzaneir, yev kerdamket vorokeir, ov zach puret yegegetsvo, yel, yeg, meshage, voroke, zach ketsu pailatsu, ais amai anabad, anzanot gohmanatses, panavor pnutyun al, vor arten avedaper vot gochelut tertetsav, arav shertanset toge yev serdit potsa. The Armenian homeland, by Chrysostom's having been exiled there, was regenerated. It was renewed. What was once a desert land, what was once Anmashag, which was not cultivated, is now cultivated by Chrysostom's very presence, by his putting of his foot on the land. Furthermore, Alishan writes, and he's speaking to Alishan is very interesting. Alishan addresses the Armenian road. He addresses a road. Imagine writing a soliloquy about the FDR Drive. I could write something about it, but it wouldn't be a soliloquy. Right? Alishan writes about the Armenian roads. He says, "O blessed Armenian road, blessed Armenian road, although difficult, yes, and the cause of the death of our saint Chrysostom, you are blessed to have received the imprint of his footsteps. Where was it that you might appear, that I might find and see the footprints of the pilgrim Chrysostom? And even if it were necessary, I would crawl on the ground so that I might pass through the same footsteps of our Saint John Chrysostom." Alishan is ready to crawl on the Armenian dirt, Amai, Anabad, desert, terrible roads, so that he can imbibe, and so that he can, through osmosis and through spiritual awakening, experience that which Chrysostom himself experienced. Moreover, like I had mentioned before, and I'll mention this really quick, St. Chrysostom preached the gospel in these areas in his exile, but he inculcated and culturated himself in the local cultures. Right? There were various races, there were various tribes that were living in these areas, and most of them had not accepted Christianity. They were very rough, right? Even to this day, there is this idea of Kavkazskaya dusha, right? It's like Caucasian spirit. It's like kind of very proud and very like ready to fight at a moment's notice for your own protection. But he said about Chrysostom, did he rather love, or was he loved by the people, or did he love? In his letters showering much praise and flattery, he remembers the philanthropy, the martasirutun, the hurasirutun, the hospitality that he found among the locals in the Armenian homeland, which he returned pochadutsets through his golden mouth, spirit, and heart, and defending these people like their own physical father. Coming to our third and final reason for why Alishan considers Chrysostom Armenian. Chrysostom is Armenian, perhaps most of all, because he is exiled and persecuted. We must not forget this Chrysostom's exile and persecution, which Alishan terms a, quote, 3-month martyrdom, right? We tend to think of martyrdom as head cut off, you're thrown in a fire, a couple of minutes, that's, how terrible it is, Azvat's Chene to anyone. It's absolutely terrible, but Alishan says this was a 3-month martyrdom at the hands of 2 lawless executioners, right? He had people that were watching him and making sure that he wasn't escaping. Furthermore, it is not simply because he is martyred that Alishan identifies Chrysostom as truly Armenian, but because of the duration of the martyrdom. Just as Alishan considers Chrysostom as Armenian because he was a holy translator, because he traveled with the Armenian homeland, so too he is Armenian because he shares in the lengthy sufferings that the Armenians have suffered. Alishan paints a clear picture for the reader of what this unnecessarily elongated torture actually means. Alishan writes the following. He says, "How impervious would the 600-mile journey have been in such hot weather and upon such untrod and unguided, rocky, karod, mountainous places, ever toward the area from which the area's rivers flow, the Ceyhan, the Kızılırmak, and the Iris." Alishan quotes St. Nerses Lampronazi about Chrysostom. St. Lampronazi says, "Blessed and gentle soul, Chrysostom, of the people of God, such an archpriest was appropriate for us, Armenians. He was tortured with us, adorned with the weaknesses of this Armenian people." The Armenian church and her people identify with Chrysostom because he is unjustly persecuted as a righteous man, having done nothing except preach the holy gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, for his giving of good news to the poor, freedom to the imprisoned, and liberty to those who are oppressed. It is the very fact that the Armenians received him in exile, this is important here, because the Armenians received Chrysostom in his exile, they have the right to claim him. You, whoever it was, I don't want to say Greeks, I don't want to say Byzantines, let's say Evdokia, you got rid of him, you didn't want him, okay, you made your choice, Verchatsav, we'll take him, and we'll make him as our own. We'll make him Armenian, Gahayatsanink. Haigatarsanink. Alishan writes, "The Armenians, the innkeepers of his exile, the companions of his last years, the servers and preservers of his body after its rest in the Lord after his death. Because of this, the Armenians have a more sensible and wonderful pride. Because of these, and for many other reasons as well, John Chrysostom is ours more than any other nation, and after the Greeks, he has a more worthy and true place in the Armenian liturgical calendar." Although Chrysostom is Assyrian by birth and Greek by education, he is Armenian in soul. His physical presence, the shedding of his blood on the Armenian highland, permanently ties him and his memory to the land and its people. However, there's a hagarag, there's a counter to this, lest the Armenians gain an indelible and an inordinate sense of pride regarding this. Alishan kind of puts us in our place. He says, upon remembering Chrysostom and how he does belong to us, don't forget the peril which was committed by our very own fathers against Sahag, Bartev, Nerses, and the like. We ourselves have committed terrible things against our own people, against our own saints. However, God forbid, I do not blame the Armenians nor the Greeks, neither the general nation nor the people, rather the hard-headed leaders, the intrigues and political parties of kings and ecclesial sees, as well as the aggrandized jealousy and fattened passions of the powerful, whose evil deeds many times befall the general population and are remembered in the name of the entire nation. A king does one thing that's terrible, and the entire nation, right, gets remembered for that evil deed. coming to the conclusion of this point, we also have to keep in mind that, this is pre-genocide, right? Genocide is, okay, consider what the Hamidian massacres, 1894. He's kind of writing in that context, but he's writing Hushiga Hairinyats Hayots in 1865. So this is kind of before that started, right? So that genocide trauma that many of us carry, that memory, right? Although they are victors and saints, they are victors in Christ as martyrs, there is still a trauma. That he didn't have that, right? Not necessarily, not directly. But what he did have were the Janissaries, the Yenicheri, right? The Janissaries, as many of us may know, were conscripted at a young age, right? They were Christian boys, 7, 8, 9, who were forcibly made into Turkish soldiers. And these Yenicheris, these Janissaries, had become Islamicized, and they terrorized much of the Christian population, especially the Armenians of the homeland. So these attacks are definitely in the mind of Alishan. Coming to our conclusion and ways in which we can think forward and where we can think ahead, how I would like to address this question again, and I'd like to present it to us so that maybe we can think about it more wholly and more holistically. Who is an Armenian saint? We can broaden our spiritual horizons to match that of our forebears. Alishan touches on something that we do not seem to grasp as well in the diaspora today. That our inherited Christian faith is more than just being church in an Armenian context. Although it is that. We are a church in an Armenian context, in an Armenian American context. Our Armenian Christianity, you can't just change the Armenian name and put it Russian, Greek, Syrian, or whatever it is. It's not something that is interchangeable in that way. Our apostolic faith, our faith in the crucified and risen Lord, is the same. But the expression of that faith is slightly different. It has different nuances. It has different shesht. It has different emphases. For our ancestors and for our spiritual fathers and mothers, to be Armenian, an Armenian Christian, and an Armenian saint was not solely predicated on one's language, genetic makeup, or citizenship on this earth. Although I would like to underline, Gesheshtem, what Aispanere Anchap Garevoren, they are very important, and they are not to be neglected. They do form a part of our identity as Armenian Christians. We cannot neglect that. Our national saints, as we understand them, Vartanank, Vahanank, Saint Sarkis, Voskiank, Sukiasyank, and all of these other saints, they do have an important place in our heart and in our faith life. However, we would be nevertheless remiss if we ignored the place of saints such as Chrysostom, Saint Jacob of Nisibis, who are Arash Nort. There's actually this is a picture of a icon that was newly consecrated at the seminary, Saint Jacob of Nisibis, Ephraim the Syrian, Gregory of Nyssa, Basil of Caesarea. All of these quote-unquote Diazeragan, Untanur, universal saints are actually saints that Krikor Narekatsi, Ananya Sanahanetsi, Sarkis Kunt, you can name the list, every single saint, right? They all tapped into what these saints had to say and harmonized it. Hayatsutsin. These peoples and these saints, not only their works, but their holiness of life, have inspired Armenian Christians for nearly 2 millennia. And for these reasons, it is easy to see why Alishan considered Chrysostom just as much an Armenian father as any of the other classically Armenian saints. For Alishan, to be Armenian is to have lived, breathed, and died in the Armenian homeland in service to the Armenian Church and for the spreading of the gospel, for evangelization. Our modern idea that a saint is Armenian purely by virtue of being a carrier of Armenian genes is anachronistic and is not something that our forebears would have necessarily prescribed to or subscribed to. And going forward, this might be something that many of us can think about, can pray about, and incorporate the integration of these saints into our individual spiritual worship, into our corporate worship as church. And it is something that will enrich us and our church and those who we come to encounter on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
So I suspect maybe we have some thoughts or questions on this very compelling and thought-provoking talk. I will open the floor if folks have some questions, because I get to needle him on these things whenever I want. So I will let you ask your questions before I ask some.
Am I right in understanding? This is quite deep for me as an average Armenian. We are embodying these people into our lives, our spiritual lives, although they were not Armenian. Okay, so we found something in what they preached and how they presented their message that reached our own core, that we brought them into our way of respect them. And while you were saying the story, I was just thinking of the statue of Saint Vartan that's now in Vatican Square. How does the Catholic Church, who's now accepted him as a saint, how does their viewpoint of him fit into their religion?
That's a very good question. Thank you for your comments. I think from my perspective, that was completely spot on about what I was trying to get across. Chrysostom St. John Chrysostom, in his person, in his writings, in his life, there was just something that was particularly important that needed to be said and kept in the Armenian patristic tradition and in the Armenian spirituality. That is undeniable. As for the construction of the Saint Vartan statue in the Vatican, that's news to me. I didn't know that. And if I were to talk about that or speculate, it would only be speculation about what their understanding of that is. They have a more they have a more general understanding of sainthood, right? So for them, a saint is a saint whether they're from North America, whether they're from Russia, whether they're from, doesn't matter for them. Usually the idea is, a saint is a saint. They don't necessarily have the extra baggage that we might have. As far as I know, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
Now I'm more curious as to how you've expressed this evening. Are they in fact looking at an Armenian saint?
Yes.
In some similar way?
It's possible. It's very possible.
I think they were, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember the exact number of, they have nishes for all. This was the last niche available.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, I know they had just canonized Grigory Naregatsi a few years ago. So there's definitely something in Armenian Christianity that has something to offer the rest of the Christian world. And really, we should tap in. We should be the proponents of that and the bearers of that. We should be the first ones who bear that in our hearts and in our souls. And furthermore, I mean, that's wonderful that they, I think that's great that they recognize him as a doctor of the church, not only a saint, but a doctor of the church, right? There's only like 50 or something of them within the Catholic Church. So Grigor Nadegatsi is a doctor, just like Chrysostom. But we shouldn't, these saints are ours, right? These are, whether someone recognizes it, whether they don't, we do, and they speak to us. So, thank you for your comment.
I just have a general question about Armenian sainthood. I think in the Catholic Church that there's all these rules about how you become a saint, and they have to have like 3 verifiable miracles or something like this. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Armenians don't have anything like that.
No.
In the church.
No, they don't have the Armenian. Well, it's very difficult to, because since we've canonized the martyrs of the genocide,
Right.
Who died for faith and for homeland, that's the official name. There hadn't been a saint since Grigor Nadegatsi, right? So that, Grigor Datevatsi, sorry. So that entire process of how someone would become a saint is kind of lost, as far as I know. But I don't think it was as streamlined, or there was not as many categories that someone had to meet. I think if the saint was respected by the people and the clergy and the church, that person would become a saint.
The exception to the rule is the Catholic Church. They are the only church that has a set, very regulated procedure for canonizing, choosing saints and canonizing them. None of the other ancient churches has such a
That's
thing.
interesting. So this Saint Vartan now, was he canonized by the Catholic Church? Did they have miracles that they could? Has he been canonized, or he's just been placed, a statue placed there as respect?
No, that's a good question, because that's news to me. I mean, unless Sirpazan.
Canonized, but Pope Francis has opened up a lot of questions by recognizing Gregory of Nadeg as a doctor of the church. Gregory of Nadeg was never a member of the Roman Catholic Church. So this is completely new ground, and Catholic theologians are struggling with these issues as well. He's opening a wider vision as far as sainthood and who it is that becomes normative for a Catholic as far as faith is concerned. So it's interesting.
I have to make a correction. I said, after I said it, it's Saint Gregory.
Okay, yes.
Oh, Nadeg. It's after they made him. So technically, the category is Doctor of the Church, which is a quite selective category of sainthood within the Catholic Church. And so the Catholics agreed that Saint Gregory of Nadeg would be considered a doctor of the Church, and subsequent to that, they unveiled a statue of him.
Yes. Attended the official inauguration of the statue of Saint Gregory on January.
I guess if there's no further comments, okay.
I just want to, pride is a sin. So I'm going to confess my sinfulness in being proud of you for this good work that you've done, and a lot of other good work, but this is really, really commendable and eye-opening for us. And, I think we as Armenian Christians, Christian Armenians, right, in the broad sense that Alishan understands that, particularly in this diocese, we have such an opportunity to explore how these various saints, whether it's the Armenian, what we used to call Armenian national saints, or whether it's any saint that is venerated traditionally by the Armenian Church and by our people. What is the message there that can feed us as far as our own faith is concerned? It's an area where we've fallen a little bit behind for probably good reasons. But among a lot of other reasons why I think your presentation, your thesis were so commendable, is that it could, it adds further fuel, further fuel for thought, and a great invitation for us. Not only John Chrysostom, who's worthy of anyone's lifetime's work, but James of Nissus, Ephraim the Syrian, and countless others that are not even names for so many of our churchgoers. They're not even recognizable names, much less what it is that these great men and women, captured as far as their own understanding of what this wonderful faith of ours is about. Who is this Jesus Christ, and what does he have to offer me? So thank you for doing all that.
Well, thank you for your words, kind words, Sir Bazan, and thank you for your consistent support and kachalerutun, your encouragement. Thank you. And I think maybe I would just to echo, if someone would is able to piggyback off a Sir Bazan, and the important too, recognizing these saints, but not in the kind of like hermeneutically sealed, like this was the saint that did X, Y, Z. His works are commentary on this, this, and this, and we accept him, and kind of that's where it ends, because I think that's where we're at now. But we can really delve into, and I think it's really a opportunity, a huge opportunity, to research our quote-unquote Armenian theologians and see how they understood them, right? See, how did they understand the Diazeragan saints, the ecumenical saints? What is the Armenian understanding of these saints, and why were they important? Why was Basil of Caesarea important? What was it about him that made us reference his works in his life? I mean, that's just a speculation. But thank you, Sir Bazan.
I think that, yeah.
All right.
I love it.